In the half-light of a northern French morning, Bernard Arnault sat hunched over his desk, a small lamp burning like a single star in the silence. The papers beneath his hands trembled, not because of the draft from the window, but because of the uncertainty that lived inside him. Numbers, sketches, letters, half-formed plans. They spread across the table like fragments of a broken mirror, each one reflecting a future he could barely recognize. Was this the beginning of something greater, or just the slow birth of another disappointment? He could already hear the voices of those who doubted him. Whispers at dinner tables, laughter in quiet offices, the shrug of family friends who believed ambition had to be restrained, polite, ordinary. France in the 1960s was not the France of opportunity. It was a land where ambition beyond one's class could sound almost indecent, like arrogance. And yet, in the silence of his father's modest home in Roubaix, Bernard imagined a world far larger than the textile machines that rattled in their factories. His family was comfortable, but not extravagant. The Arnauts owned a small construction company, one of countless firms that helped rebuild post-war France brick by brick. It paid the bills, kept bread on the table, and secured a middle-class life. But Bernard was restless. He hated the dust on his shoes, the crude smell of cement, the endless meetings about contracts and materials. He did not want to build walls. He wanted to break through them. Still, he was bound to his origins. At the École Polytechnique, one of the most prestigious schools in France, he was trained as an engineer. Every calculation, every formula, every sleepless night reminded him of the future his father expected. A dutiful son who would expand the family's business with discipline, not with dreams. But Bernard carried within him an obsession that engineering could not explain: beauty. He was captivated by the way architecture could dominate a skyline, by the way a dress could command a room, by the way a name, whispered in the right tone, could carry power. He did not yet know that this fascination would define his life, but he felt it like an itch beneath the skin, something waiting to be born. The first step, however, was not beauty. It was survival. When Bernard returned home, his father looked at him with a mix of pride and expectation. "You will take the company forward," he said. The words were heavy, almost like a sentence. And Bernard, though young, understood the weight of inheritance. To refuse would be betrayal. To accept would be surrender. He agreed outwardly, but inside, he already planned an escape. The textile business was crumbling. Cheap imports were beginning to erode France's factories, and local industries gasped for air. Bernard saw what others ignored. His father's empire, modest as it was dying. He did not want to preside over a slow funeral. He wanted something immortal. So he made his first decision, the kind that leaves scars. He convinced his father to sell most of the family's assets. Colleagues called it madness. Why dismantle a business that still paid its way? Why risk everything for some vague, undefined dream? But Bernard was not motivated by security. He was motivated by the cold terror of insignificance. The money raised gave him options. Not many, but enough. And with that fragile war chest, he searched for an entry point into the world that obsessed him: luxury. But France was merciless to dreamers. When Bernard spoke to bankers, they smiled politely and closed their doors. When he reached out to investors, they shook their heads. He was too young, too untested, too bold. The Arnault name did not carry weight in Parisian salons. He was just another provincial boy with ideas too large for his pockets. There were days when the rejection stung so deeply that he considered retreat. Nights when he stared at the ceiling, wondering if he had destroyed his father's legacy for nothing. And always the voices of doubt returned. "You are not meant for this. Stay in your place. Be grateful for what you had." But ambition is a strange fire. It burns even when buried under shame. His break came not with triumph, but with ruin. The French government had decided to save certain failing companies by auctioning them off for symbolic sums. Among them was a struggling textile empire with a forgotten jewel, a small fashion house known as Christian Dior. To most, Dior was just a faded name from a golden age now eclipsed. To Bernard, it was a door into immortality. He moved quickly, silently, like a predator sensing prey. With ruthless precision, he used his family's fortune and government incentives to acquire the crumbling group. Many mocked him again. Why pour money into a dying fashion brand when the world was moving toward industry and technology? They could not see what he saw, the name, the symbol, the weight of history. But owning Dior was not yet victory. The brand was drowning, its image stale, its finances broken. Employees doubted him. Competitors laughed. Paris whispered that Bernard Arnault was a reckless boy playing with ghosts. His first months were humiliation. Every day he entered the office, he felt the stares, contempt, pity, suspicion, and yet he endured. He fired ruthlessly, cut costs without mercy, and rebuilt Dior not as a memory but as a weapon. His coldness earned him nicknames: the Terminator, the Ice King. He did not care. He had discovered something far more intoxicating than approval, control, but the price was solitude. Friends slipped away, old colleagues avoided him. Even in family circles, he was the subject of uneasy silence. He had become something they could not understand, a man who preferred the company of risk over the comfort of safety. And then, at last, the first victory arrived. A collection released under Dior's name caught the attention of Paris once more. Sales, though modest, began to grow. The newspapers wrote cautiously of a revival. It was not glory, not yet, but it was survival. It was proof that he had not gambled everything for nothing. Bernard Arnault stood alone in his office late one night, looking at the lights of Paris stretching beyond the window. He felt no triumph, only exhaustion. But beneath it, a whisper of vindication stirred. You were right not to give up. You were right to risk everything. It was a fragile, uncertain victory. But to Bernard, it tasted like eternity. The lights of Paris always seemed brighter from a distance. Up close, Bernard knew they flickered with cruelty, with competition, with the cold judgment of those who believed success should be inherited rather than earned. He had survived the first test reviving Dior from the brink of irrelevance, but survival was not enough. A single brand, no matter how legendary, could collapse again with one mistake, one scandal, one shift in taste. And Bernard was not interested in fragile victories. He wanted an empire. But empires are not built in sunlight. They are carved in shadows, in quiet deals, in nights where fear claws at the throat. The early years were merciless. Each morning he woke before dawn, haunted by numbers, by debts, by whispers that he was overreaching. Dior's revival gave him credibility, but it did not give him peace. Employees feared his cold gaze, competitors plotted against him, and bankers still doubted him. He worked like a machine, stripping away weakness in others and in himself. If he had once been a son searching for escape, he was now something colder, an architect of destiny, willing to sacrifice warmth for permanence. Yet even he was not immune to doubt. There were nights when the silence of his apartment pressed on him like a weight. He had power now, yes, but also enemies, and in their eyes he still saw the question, who are you to stand among us? The aristocrats of luxury old families with long histories looked at him as if he were an intruder, a provincial climbing too high. They dismissed him, tried to freeze him out of circles where true influence lived. And so Bernard plotted his revenge not through anger, but through patience. He studied their weaknesses, their complacency. He saw companies bloated with nostalgia, families too proud to cut costs, executives clinging to brands they no longer understood. Where others saw heritage, he he saw opportunities for conquest. The acquisitions began slowly. One brand here, another there. Sometimes he was welcomed. More often he was resisted. But Bernard had learned the art of persistence. He negotiated like a blade, silent and sharp, cutting through hesitation with cold logic. His rivals whispered that he was without heart, but Bernard did not crave affection. He craved control. Still, every step forward carried its shadows. His name became associated not with creativity, but with ruthlessness. Journalists called him a predator, a man who devoured companies. Artists feared him, suspecting he valued profit over beauty. Some within DR muttered that the brand was losing its soul under his iron hand. And yet, as sales grew, as stores reopened, as the name Dior once again commanded Parisian runways, Bernard silenced his critics not with words, but with results. But memory is a cruel companion. Even as he stood in gilded rooms surrounded by models, designers and investors, he sometimes remembered the early days, the papers scattered on the desk, the silence of rejection, the way he had gambled his family's fortune on a dying house. He remembered how close he had come to obscurity, how fragile the first steps had been, and he understood something others did not. Greatness begins not with applause, but with humiliation. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Bernard found himself walking alone through the streets of Paris. The rain slicked the stones, and the air smelled of iron. He passed the storefronts of other houses, some flourishing, some decaying. He thought of the men who had once led them, men who believed their names would last forever. Now many were forgotten, their companies swallowed by time. He paused before a window, staring at a mannequin draped in silk. The world saw fabric. He saw power. Not the superficial kind that politicians wielded, but the deeper power of desire, of image, of dreams. Luxury was not about clothes or handbags. It was about the illusion of eternity. And he, Bernard Arnault, would become its architect. But the road to eternity was paved with betrayals. Some employees who had once trusted him were discarded when their usefulness ended. Partners who expected gratitude found only cold efficiency. Even in his personal life, Bernard carried the mark of ambition. Relationships frayed, conversations turned into silences. For those who loved him, the question was always the same. Did Bernard care for them, or only for the empire he was building? And perhaps even he did not know the answer. Years later, as the world began to whisper his name with awe, Bernard would sometimes sit alone in his office, long after the city had gone to sleep. He would look at the towers of glass and steel, at the lights scattered like stars across the dark horizon, and he would remember the first fragile steps, selling his father's company, buying a broken brand, enduring mockery, rejection, suspicion, the mistakes, the cuts, the sleepless nights, the terror of failure so close that he could feel it breathing at his neck. He understood then what most never grasp. Success is not built on triumph, but on scars. The first step is always taken in darkness, without applause, without certainty. It is taken when every voice says don't, when every instinct begs for safety, when the cost of risk is unbearable. And still you move. Bernard Arnault moved. And from those first lonely steps, an empire was born. Yet he never forgot how fragile it had been. The memory clung to him like a shadow, the boy with papers trembling in his hands, wondering if he was building a dream or a ruin. That doubt never left him. It sharpened him, haunted him, drove him to expand again and again, never satisfied, never still. Because deep down, beneath the empire, beneath the titles, beneath the wealth that would one day make him the richest man in the world, Bernard Arnault still carried the fear of that silence. The fear that if he stopped moving, stopped conquering, stopped building, he would vanish back into obscurity. And so he kept walking, step after step, through shadows and light, carrying with him the eternal truth of beginnings, that the first step is the hardest, the loneliest, the most dangerous, that it demands sacrifice, doubt, and courage beyond reason, that it never feels like destiny, only like madness. But it is the step that changes everything, and without it, there is nothing.